Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about ways in which we could remake Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and see if we can't make it good. Stick around and find out. Remaking something, at least writing it or trying to figure out how to make something better, is kind of a fun exercise for me, especially when I have writer's block. And essentially what I like to do is I like to take a bad movie or a movie that has a very flawed presentation, and it kind of forces you on what could you do to improve upon it, what could you do to sort of change it, to make it flow better, to make it feel better, to make the movie just overall better, or at least attempt to do it. It's a fun exercise to do. And what better way to do this than with Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Now, to establish a few rules when it comes to this game that I like to play, basically you must have the same basic plot elements that were present within the original movie. Essentially what you need to do, treat this like this was a final draft of a script that landed on your desk. That's what I like to do. So there's no real reinventing the movie wholesale. Full disclaimer, I like Star Trek V. It is by far the weakest of the 6 original movies, and I'd argue one of the weakest of the 10 Star Trek movies before J.J. Abrams took over. And one of the reasons why is because there are some genuinely great character moments in this movie, and I love almost everything with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in this movie. I really do, especially the campfire scenes. I think it fits all 3 characters. I like their interactions. I like the dialogue. You can tell that the actors have decent chemistry with each other, and it's handled very well. I think Bill Shatner actually directed those scenes in particular, scenes where the characters get to act like their characters. I think Bill Shatner handled very well as a director. I also like the idea of a rogue Vulcan who embraces his emotions instead of trying to control them. Admittedly, I think they did something a little cooler with it in Star Trek Enterprise, but I like sort of the inklings of it here. I like the beginnings of something here. I like the idea of him being this sort of evangelical leader that, through his pure charisma, essentially, could rally all of these people. I really like those ideas. I also like the idea of them searching for God, if only it wasn't taken so literally. I like the idea that they're searching for something greater than themselves. And that's the case where I like the idea more than I like the execution of it. I also need to say that the music is fantastic. I mean, it's by Jerry Goldsmith. Everything that man touches is amazing. And I also think the cinematography is great. And it looks a little bit different stylistically than the previous Star Trek films before it. The other movies looked a lot more locked down. Well, this movie has a lot of like gliding camera shots that goes from one side of the set to the other. I generally like that. I like the look of this movie. Now, what didn't I like about Star Trek V? The special effects, of course, that goes without saying. In fact, I've done an entire video about there being a possible director's cut to this movie and how I would like to see a director's cut to this movie. And the overall plot within Star Trek V just does not gel. It does not gel. There are too many plot holes. Sybok, such as Sybok being Spock's half-brother, that makes absolutely no sense at all. The crew magically turning against Kirk, I don't think makes much sense at all. The Great Barrier being an easy thing to get through when it was built up as like this horrible thing. Well, if it was that easy to get through, why haven't more people done it? You know, that sort of thing. And of course, the coincidence that the Enterprise happens to be there, the only ship in the area, the quadrant or whatever, you know. And of course, you know, Kirk climbing the mountain, free. Yeah, he's a little too old and a little too heavy-set for that. What would I do if I remade Star Trek V, The Final Frontier? One of the first things I would do is not make it a search for God directly. In fact, Sybok is instead looking for a power source. And I don't mean like he's going to take over the galaxy, that sort of thing. No, he's looking for this ultimate being, this ultimate power that is somehow driving him towards it. Sort of like how V'ger in Star Trek The Motion Picture sort of drives Spock to make certain decisions in that film. Except I would do it through emotion instead of logic, because I think that would be a good counterpoint to Spock within the first movie. In fact, I would actually keep the entire opening of this movie. The entire opening of this movie was Sybok approaching in that weird horse, It's a fantastic scene. It really is, and I love the atmosphere of it. I love the shot of Sybok laughing and the music swells underneath it. It's creepy. You don't really know what's going on, and the fact that it's a Vulcan laughing, it's one of the first times we've ever really have seen that, other than Spock having a couple of outbursts in TOS. It was a really good scene. I really liked that. Speaking of Sybok, I would not make Sybok Spock's half-brother. In fact, I would just make him sort of like a close childhood friend. In fact, this, I think, would play into Spock well, considering the fact that he is indeed half-human. You know, Sarek's relationship with Spock was already strained before that. Luckily, by the movies, it had been remedied quite well. But this could have been part of that strain. Sort of seeing how, like, Sarek could have forced Spock to leave Sybok in fear that Spock would embrace his human side rather than the Vulcan side, which, of course, Spock actually did. Spock embraced more of his Vulcan side than his human side. And had he stayed friends with Sybok, the inverse might have happened. He might have become a sort of follower of Sybok. Now, of course, I would tweak Kirk climbing the mountain. I would still have him climbing a mountain. I like the idea of Kirk bettering himself, and so he's taking this tough challenge. I would just make him hiking a mountain instead of doing the free climb that he does. Because I think if he was just hiking a steeper mountain, like it was a tough one, and he's just sort of hiking it, like give him a cane, or not a cane, but the walking stick, give him a backpack, and he's just climbing it himself, I think the impact would still be the same. The imagery would still be the same. The message would still be the same. And you can still even have him fall. You can have him fall into a cavern, and it's Spock that has to come there and save him. You can still keep a lot of that there. You just have to change the location a little bit. In fact, it might even help play, you know, into the end of the movie. You know, the beginning sort of parallels what happens at the end. Sybok leads Kirk and the party to the chamber where God is supposed to be. You can have the sort of parallel imagery of Kirk and crew climbing this mountain, and it parallels with that. It would be symmetrical imagery, and I think it would fit well into the themes of the movie. Now, one of the things that I would change almost right off the back is to help address the coincidence part of the script. This part of the movie would not take place on Earth. In fact, it would take place on some weird vacation planet of sorts, sort of like a paradise, a wooded planet that this species kind of, not Risa, to be specific, it would not be Risa. Have the whole crew on vacation, you know? You don't just have some of the main crew. I mean, have a vast majority of the crew being like, you know what, we're going on vacation, everybody's on shore leave, have fun. And that will play into what happens a little bit later. But essentially what this would mean is that there would be a skeleton crew on board the Enterprise. A very small crew aboard the Enterprise, just enough to keep it running. So maybe you could have some exposition or something like that, and this would play into the plot that they had just completed a mission to deliver a human ambassador to this peace planet. That human ambassador may be David Warner's character, for example, or something like that. It doesn't even need to necessarily be human, it just needs to be an ambassador of some kind for the Federation. And you could say that they're having this sort of peace conference on this planet. Sort of takes care of the coincidence side of things. They're already here. They were sent on this diplomatic mission, and the crew of the Enterprise just took advantage of the fact that, hey, this is a vacation planet. We have been working almost nonstop for quite a while. Let's just have some fun. Why not? We're right here. And also, I think, and in the process, I would also keep the campfire scenes almost completely intact. Like, I wouldn't touch them at all. I love the dialogue, I love the music, I love the cinematography. It's simple, it's direct, but yet it's beautiful. And I think it is beautiful. It's some of my favorite moments between the three, between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. It really is. And I think it fits well with Kirk and foreshadows some of the decisions that he makes towards the end of the film. I will always die alone. And what does he do towards the end of the movie? He sends Spock and McCoy away, and he has to face the entity himself. And we'll address that a little bit later as well. I would also get rid of the Enterprise being put together by monkeys, as Scott puts it. I would just have the Enterprise be a competent ship. I would probably include lines just to say, like, yes, this is a different Enterprise. This is no longer the NCC-1701 refit. It's now the NCC-1701A. I would definitely include some of that. Like, I love the moment where Kirk sits down in his chair. He's like, I miss my old chair. I would. I'd keep lines like that. I would, but I wouldn't have the ship falling apart. In fact, I would focus on it being like it's the last of a year-long run. You know, like, this is why they're on vacation. They've been working almost non-stop. I would also keep, you know, when the hijack happens and everything like that, I would keep all of that the same, you know, just keep it on this vacation planet, not on some deserted planet in the middle of nowhere. And I would also have the crew of the Enterprise try to save them. I would keep all of that there. I think that's fitting in more of the TOS style that Bill Shatner kind of wanted to go for. But I would make the human ambassador, or some of the ambassadors, already in on the coup, Cybok's coup, and having turned. This was all a ruse, an epic ruse for this cult, essentially, Cybok's cult. This trap that they sort of set on Kirk leaves a lot of the Enterprise crew being left basically as prisoners on this vacation planet and stranded. However, I would not make them evil. You know, I would not make Cybok evil. I would make sure that Cybok leaves provisions for them so he doesn't just abandon them. I would make sure to make that a point, because I think Cybok's entire purpose would be peaceful. This would also change the dynamic of the entire thing. So the crew of the Enterprise does not turn on Kirk in this version of the movie. They are held in a spot where they cannot do anything. That's the big difference. They remain loyal to Kirk from beginning to end. But because a lot of them are down on this vacation planet, that leaves the Enterprise open to being hijacked quickly and effectively. And I would also have it a little bit more of a peaceful takeover because of that. It would be kind of like Khan on the Reliant, but peaceful, if that makes any sense at all. It would be kind of like that. I would also keep Uhura and Scotty on the Enterprise the entire time, and they sort of lead this tiny resistance on board to try to sabotage Cybok at every chance that they possibly could. I would definitely do that. There's inklings of that within Star Trek V that I like, especially with Scotty, but they just don't follow through with it because, again, Uhura betrays Kirk for no reason at all. Speaking of Scotty and Uhura, I would get rid of their out-of-nowhere romance, and instead I would approach it a little bit more like Star Trek IV. Something that I loved about Star Trek IV was the fact that they put pairings together that weren't normally together, other than Kirk and Spock, of course. But you had, like, McCoy and Scotty, you had Chekhov and Uhura. It got these characters to act more so than just yes sir, no sir in the background. I got them to some decent character stuff out of that. And I would approach Star Trek V in much the same way. So now instead of Scotty and McCoy, it would be Uhura and Scotty. So we'd have some new character interactions there. And I would also have this crew kind of split up into different pairings, all in the purpose of getting better character interaction here. That is the point of the entire thing. I would keep Sulu and Chekhov, like they did in the movie, actually, in Star Trek V. I actually think they have good chemistry together, the two actors. Definitely Uhura and Scotty. You know, all of them play small roles in sabotaging Cybok, but the key is, in the end, they do fail. They're just outnumbered. Something else I would completely axe from this movie is the Klingon side plot. I think it's absolutely needless, and basically a failed attempt to add more tension to the movie. I think the situation itself should have enough tension that you wouldn't need the Klingons involved. Also, I'd have this blatantly stated to be Sulu's last mission on the Enterprise, and I think that would add a lot of character with him. It'd sort of be like Chekhov's maybe enjoying his company a little bit more because he knows that their time is limited. Or maybe Chekhov is about to, you know, have this sort of be like they're getting down to the nitty-gritty, that their days together of this crew are numbered, that they are getting a little too old and stuff like that. You could sort of sprinkle that in a little bit here. I mean, that's... And I can't say I'm pulling that out of my ass, because that's been sort of an undertone throughout the movies. And there was the idea of Sulu becoming his own captain, the captain of the Excelsior in particular, all the way back into Star Trek II. Look at some of the deleted lines that were shot and recorded. In fact, there's a YouTube video containing those missing lines. And Sulu blatantly says, I'm going to be captain of the Excelsior in those. So it's not like it wasn't established beforehand. Enterprise is also not going to be heading to the center of the galaxy. I think that is dumb. Cybok is just leading his thousands of followers to a mysterious planet that's calling for him. I would have them include mentioning Shakari and the Garden of Eden and all these biblical and religious symbols that are present throughout all these planets, just known by different names. I'm not sure if this would be possible because of rights issues, but I think it would be interesting if Cybok were to mention Spock feeling V'ger, now Cybok having that, but with this new strange entity, and I think it would sort of parallel Spock, and Spock would understand Sybok a little bit more. V'ger and Spock had a connection because of their deep devotion to logic. Have Cyboks be emotional. I would also keep Sybok revealing the main trio's pain. You know, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. I would have that. It shows just how good of an actor DeForest Kelley is. In fact, I would keep that moment entirely the same. Him killing his father. I'd keep that entirely the same. Where I would divert from it is I would have Kirk and Spock, I would keep them able to see what all their pain are. I think it'd be fitting that this scene would also kind of reveal it to each other. I would keep it where they can kind of see each other. But the movie presents this as magic. Like, there's no real explanation or logical reason why our characters can see each other's pain. I understand if it was just in the heads of the individual characters and the other characters can't actually see it, but that's clearly not the case because our characters start interacting with each other. I would probably play it up some Vulcan magic or something, maybe some massive mind meld that Sybok can do just because he's taken a different path than what the normal path is for Vulcans. Something along those lines, just a little bit more of an explanation, and I would buy it. It wouldn't take much, and I would buy it. So I would change Spock's pain. I would change it from it being him thinking about his dad as a newborn. I would change that, and I would instead tie it directly to Kirk. I would have Spock's pain be him dying and leaving Kirk. I would have that, and I would also have Kirk's also be the same. Something that makes Kirk sad is the fact that he lost Spock once, and he's always afraid that he's going to lose Spock again. I would play into that. However, that's not the real crux of Kirk's pain. Kirk might think that's the crux of his pain, but the real crux happens next, and it's Kirk's son dying. That is the primary source of Kirk's pain. After all, he just learned that he had a son. He finally sees his son. He wants to be a part of his son's life. He wants to help him. He wants to learn who he is. He wants to be a part of his son's life, only for him to be violently ripped away from him. And we see how much this affects Kirk in the next movie. I think it would be interesting to bring that up here within Star Trek V, and it would play into Star Trek VI. So when this is all finished, I would have Kirk not side with Sybok, but I would have him understand. I would even maybe have him literally say, "I get it." And doing all this will keep the loyalties where they need to be, right? It'll keep Kirk, Spock, it would keep Spock and McCoy loyal to Kirk. It would keep the crew loyal to Kirk. So I would have the Enterprise travel through the Great Barrier, and I would have it be much more perilous. I really, really, really would. I would have it to where Sybok must capitulate to the original crew, while they're good, are not the experts that, you know, Sulu, Chekhov, and all of them are. So what happens is they're nearly destroyed or something like that. They've taken a lot of damage. The shields are about to collapse. Sybok capitulates to Kirk and says, "Take over." And there's sort of this trust thing that happens as a result. Because I like the idea that probably within the mind meld scene, Kirk understands that Sybok is not evil. He's just misguided. And so instead of them trying to fight each other at this point, they're kind of respectfully working together. In this scene, Kirk could have easily overthrown Sybok, get him out of there, retake the Enterprise, but Kirk doesn't. So they got through their expertise, through their years of expertise, they managed to get through the Great Barrier, and just barely. Within the process, I would establish that the transporter is horribly damaged, so that would play into some stuff a little bit later. Yes, that's a total plot device, but whatever. You know. So once they reach Shakari, I would keep everything with Sybok and them going down to the planet. I would keep that almost completely intact. I would have Kirk leading the way. I'd have the shots parallel with him and the opening of him climbing the mountain. That's the only difference that I would do. I really like those sequences. I think they're really pretty. They're wonderfully shot. It's wonderfully lit. The music is great. I would also like a bit where Sybok stops Kirk from bringing his phaser. I love that moment within the movie. And I like Kirk's hesitation, but also his understanding. And I think that would play a little bit better into the trust thing that I've established in the remake, more so than what Shatner was trying to do in the original movie, but failed at doing. So I'd keep the interest of God identical to the original movie. I really do love this scene, and I like Sybok's realization that he's been tricked because he wanted to believe and was not thinking logically. I love the reveal of everything. I love the dialogue that happens in the scene. And yes, I would even keep what does God need with the starship. And speaking of the God entity, I would keep it relatively the same, you know, as it could use the Enterprise as a ship to transport its power elsewhere in the galaxy and not trapped on this rock. I would probably keep that relatively the same. I think that's a decent enough excuse as to why it was tricking Sybok to get there. I would keep Sybok's death the same, as it buys Kirk, Spock, and McCoy time to retreat. I genuinely like that scene. All the while, I would intercut with Scotty desperately trying to fix the transporter. I would keep Kirk ordering Spock and McCoy beamed up before him. I want this to tie into the I Will Die Alone, as William Shatner originally wanted, and in fact does do within the movie itself. Kirk is now alone, facing this strange entity that's trying to kill him. So I would keep Kirk trying to outrun this mysterious energy being. I would certainly try to make it a little bit more visually spectacular than the mess that we ended up getting, and there's a whole reason why the ending is the way it is. If you want more information on that, check out my director's cut or my video about a possible director's cut to Star Trek V. Link is definitely in the description below. I wouldn't want Kirk's rockmen. You know, Shatner wanted to add like these devilish rockmen in there. I wouldn't have included them. I think the concept of that has always been silly, so I wouldn't have done that. I would keep it this entity that's just sort of invisible entity too, that's chasing him. I think that's kind of creepy. And of course it chases Kirk up a mountain where he thinks he's going to die, and he's going to die alone. However, I would have Spock team up with Sulu and Chekhov as they ready a shuttle pod, and they rig some sort of energy weapon to it or something that they could discharge and hopefully kill or just hurt this entity that is chasing Kirk. So that would be what would replace the Klingons. It's stuff like that. Chekhov will be the man at the weapons, Sulu will fly the shuttle pod, or the shuttlecraft, and Spock will be the captain. Again, we get some more character interaction here. It also shows that Chekhov and Sulu are still loyal to Kirk. It would give all of that, bring it into a pretty nice little bow, especially if we know that Sulu is going to leave the Enterprise, make this sort of his last big thing is him saving his captain. I think it's kind of fitting. And of course, they do save Kirk in the last moment, and thus playing into the notion that you were never alone. Kirk was never alone, which is kind of what happens in Star Trek V with the Klingons, but it just doesn't play out quite the way I think Shatner wanted it to. With the entity's death, I would actually have the Great Barrier dissipate. It was probably keeping the thing or the entity on the planet, and once the entity dies, make it some sort of trigger, the Great Barrier disappears as well. And thus the entity is now dead, and the Enterprise can get out safely without much, dramatism, And so have them return to the vacation planet after this, where they have a toast with each other. They say their goodbyes, and they know that this is going to be one of the last times that the crew are all going to be get together, and maybe have Kirk give a toast like to the time that we have left and everything like that. Have them thanking each other, have people apologizing and stuff like that, and make it sort of an ordeal. In the end, the only person that died within this entire film was Sybok. I would have nobody else die. Sybok would be the only casualty of the whole thing. Again, sort of paralleling Star Trek the Motion Picture, which I know Bill Shatner was calling back to when he was developing Star Trek V, so I sort of keep that in line here as well. I would keep the dialogue between Kirk and Spock and McCoy the same. I think that was genuinely a great thing as well. I love how Spock is reminiscing about Sybok, and Kirk saying that he lost a brother once. I would keep all of that dialogue the same. I love that bit. I think it's some fantastic character interactions. And I'd even keep the moment like, "Where is God?" And Kirk points to his heart and says, "It's here. It's within the heart." I love that. I love the themes of that. I love the music behind it. I know it's in Star Trek V, but I think it's a pretty profound scene, and I love the theme of that. And I would still end it on the vacation planet with the trio singing "Row, row, row your boat." Fuck off. I like that. And you're never going to change my mind. It ends with our three characters sitting around a campfire, basking in each other's love, basking in their love, their brotherly love towards each other. And I really like that. That's my remake of Star Trek V. What I would do if the script landed in front of me and Paramount said, "Adam, write another draft." That is what I would do. What would you do if you were told to remake Star Trek V? It's a fun exercise. Recommend that you do it. It's really fun. Anyways, stay tuned for more episodes of Welcome to 10 Forward. All my social media is in the description below. And in the end, this is Adam Nice of And Productions saying sayonara.